extremely excited to be here today with everybody to talk about one of our favorite things. One, rum. As James Beard said, of all the spirits in your cabinet, rum is the most romantic, and I definitely have fallen in love with this category through Lorena's artistry and how incredibly unique Zacapa is, and learning more about that process was really a highlight of the things I've done in my career. And so this world-class studio, I'm super excited to bring it to you because Cask to Cocktail was about this exploration of what makes Zacapa rum and rum in general so much of a deep layered category. And you talk about the deep layers, which it relates back to, again, the wood, the cask, everything that we're doing with rum is painting all the different layers of flavor through the process. So there's an artistry there that I think we all can relate to as mixologists and people who create. This world-class studio, the Zacapa rum-led session is going to be taking a closer look at casks, blending the art of maturation. When it comes to cask matured spirits, there's no better place than to learn at Zacapa because the house above the clouds is so rich and it has so many different elements that we're playing with that contribute to our maturation, to our cask aging. So the fact that Guatemala as well, with its difference of terrain where we grow our sugarcane at sea level and then take it to the house of the clouds 2,300 meters above sea level, and how that all plays and interacts with the product that we're making and how it changes it. We're going to look at that and specifically how the wood does that, but using the incredible solera system, which is borrowed from the Spanish traditions that were brought over and very important into the rum, and how we use a multitude of cask types and styles. And this helps us to be able to capture a wide range of flavors and textures and all those things that when it comes to building cocktails are so important for us to think about in the spirits that we're using. So each one of those elements has a part of the story to tell in Zacapa's legacy, and we're going to explore that. There's no finer spirit to go on this journey with than Zacapa rum. So I thank you for that. And the journey through the cask is crucial for different reasons. The char levels, so how much we are burning that wood to release different flavors that are inherent to the wood and how that shows. The dressing, the age of the casks, the type of casks will matter, the temperature where we're aging, the spirit type here being rum, how that plays differently than maybe our counterparts in Scotland with Johnny Walker and Talisker, which we've been exploring as well this week. The temperature, the location, where it is in the Solera system, it's extremely complex, but we hope to truly understand the impact of how much of the wood interaction is in the final spirit, the chemical compounds involved. We won't get crazy technical, just the things we need to know, I think, in like food element ways, and how we can design our cocktails to take advantage of this wonderful relationship.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynette, for starting us off. So we're talking a lot about aging here, so it's important to focus on the wood and the barrels, as you were saying. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that kind of make the barrels what they are and how they influence the spirit. So after barrels are built, the first thing that happens, the inside is toasted. And toasting actually causes the lignin in the wood to start releasing aromas and flavors that we associate with aged spirits, particularly vanillin, which, just how it sounds, tastes and smells like vanilla. And toasting also starts to break down the cellulose and hemicellulose, the components that kind of make up the structure of the wood. And those are going to bring some toasty, bready, buttery flavors that we really love in our spirits as well. And the process that comes after toasting is probably the process you're most familiar with when it comes to preparing barrels for aging spirits, and that is charring. And when you char a barrel, you're actually igniting the inside of the barrel. And that's going to turn the inner layer of the barrel basically into a layer of charcoal, a layer of carbon. And if you know anything about charcoal and carbon, it acts as a filter, which is going to one of the things it's going to do is going to help mellow the less appealing qualities of the new make spirit that comes off the still and that goes into the barrel. And it's also going to contribute tannins and color. And this charring also starts to bring out those different flavors in the wood that will influence the spirit as it starts to age. And barrels can be charred to different levels. So depending on the level, the effects of the char on the spirit can be stronger or weaker, depending on what level you char to. And beyond the toasting and the charring of the barrels, the actual type of wood that's used in the barrel is hugely influential on the flavor of the finished spirit. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the different types of oak that go into the Zacapa Solera system and how each one influences the spirit. The first type is American oak, which is actually the most widely used type of wood in spirit maturation. And it's going to be less porous, so it gives a lower level of tannin than other types of oak, but it provides those flavors that we all associate with American whiskey, like vanilla, caramel, tobacco, and so yeah, there's signature aromas of candy and tobacco, coconut, spice. You think of American whiskey, we think of these flavors, and so that would be the flavors that American oak is bringing to the table in Zacapa. And another type of oak used, of course, European oak. European oak grows mostly in the Limousin forest, used widely in the aging of cognac, Armagnac, sherry, and it's a more porous type of oak than American oak, so it's going to give more tannin, that characteristic kind of grip on the tongue that spirits have that we really love. And it's also going to bring flavors of clove and sweeter fruits along with those tannins. And it's super aromatic, brings those delicious resiny flavors as well. And beyond just the type of oak, Zacapa uses barrels that have seen influence previously from other spirits. And so obviously ex-spirit casks are going to give flavors to the Zacapa that come from the spirits that are previously aged in those casks. They use American oak casks that previously held American whiskey. So you're going to get those more of that vanilla, toffee, coconut flavors. And European oak casks that were previously used for sherry. And those are my favorite flavors in the Zacapa, honestly. The flavors that come from the Oloroso cask, the PX cask, those toasted nut flavors, apricots, cloves. They also use European oak ex cognac casks for the Zacapa XO expression. So that gets an additional aging in ex cognac casks, giving you those rich cooked fruits, coffee, caramel notes that the Zacapa XO has. And a cask can be used a number of times, but a cask is I kind of compare it to like a tea bag. It's when you use it the first time, the tea that comes out is going to be very strong. But when you use the tea bag a second time, it's going to get weaker and weaker. And a barrel is kind of the same way. The influence that it'll have on the spirit as it's used and used will get weaker and weaker until the cask is spent, as they say. And so I'm going to pass it back to Lynette here, and she's going to talk about what happens after the spirit's put into the barrel and it starts to age.
All right, so maturation. This is really where the magic happens. All the beautiful work that's done when we're fermenting the spirit, crushing the cane, and then it's getting it up here to the house above the clouds, where we take the rum through different sections. So the three different types of maturation we have here are subtractive maturation, additive maturation, and then interactive maturation. So we're going to go ahead and describe the first one, which is subtractive maturation. So in other words, what's happening is, new make spirit, it has all those different congeners. You're trying, you do what you can as you distill it to get all those things out. But the spirit's quite high proof. The spirit has a lot of other, young flavors that need to be toned down, that need to mature, that need to get to a point of elegance. So we have to then use the barrel aging for that. So stuff is taken away from the spirit because that hot, fiery, we call it aguardiente, you get that like hot water, that fiery point that's naturally occurring from sulfur compounds. So we want to remove that. And what's great is that using the barrels, that happens. So naturally, some of those will evaporate over time. So whether or not you put it into a barrel or not, some of those things will just, evaporate out. But most will be absorbed into the charred layer. So when you think about like your Brita filter, right? Your Brita filter has charcoal. Charcoal is filtering out some of those things from the water that you don't want to have present there anymore. What we're doing here is not filtering with charcoal. We're using the charred barrel to act in that way. So as the liquid is in that barrel, it's moving around and it's coming in contact with that char, which is helping to remove some of those flavors. It's like when you're using a cooking hood in Tennessee whiskey, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not that these add, this adds a little bit of color, but it doesn't add a huge amount in terms of aroma. So that's where this point is. The spirit that comes out of this barrel is a little bit mellower and the complexities just begin to show themselves. The second phase, which is additive, so this is where we're really more focused in really paying attention to what we want to introduce into the spirit and what conversation, like this conversation to the wood, how they're going to pull flavors and notes out of each other. So this is when the spirit starts to extract those flavors from the oak. And like Katie said, things like vanilla and all those beautiful like cherry notes, spice notes, this is all that what we want to strive for. So this happens at the same time, right? So you're going through the charcoal and filtering, but then you're pulling out and extracting other flavors. So that's why I always like to say it's that conversation that happens back. So we're going to get some things like vanilla, we're going to get those spiciness, we're going to get a little bit of tannin, obviously from that interaction as well, and the uptake of color. So again, this is that part of painting it on. So the spirit and wood are alongside each other for that journey. The third part of this is probably the least understood. It's the one that's always taken me a little bit longer to get, and that's why there's wonderful experts in the world who have been doing this and study this. But this is the interactive maturation. So this is where the flavors of the spirit and the cask begin to work together, and they evolve and they create new and more complex aromas. And that's super exciting. So when you add, it's like a lab test, two things come together and all of a sudden they're creating new aromas and molecules, and that's how this works. So a smaller amount of the acetic acid is produced when the alcohol interacts in the spirit. So it produces the fruity compounds that we call esters. So those have crazy amounts of aromas. When you smell in like a whiskey tasting glass, if you've seen the ones that are, you know, the Glencairns and the things that are built for tasting, or the beautiful Zacapa glass that Lorena developed for Riedel, the way it's shaped helps you to kind of break down and smell those aromas. So if you smell the glass from the top down, you'll notice on the top of the glass when you're smelling, you'll get floral, beautiful aromas. As you smell in the mid-range, you're going to get more of those spicy notes, and then you'll kind of get low notes. So it's high, middle, and lows in that way that you're smelling the influence of this barrel. And in this stage, it's just, I think it's the magic and the beauty. So the boundaries that have been put between the wood and dry spirits, it starts to blur. And all of this is driven by air. Air is the thing that's happening. It's that airflow. So when you look at why Solera systems are the way they are, the way they're built, they're meant to allow air to get through the barrels. How, you know, in rick houses, if you visited, where they move things around for different airflow. In bodegas and sherry, how they open the window to let the air in. Air is so important. And at Zacapa, we are so lucky because it's so high. So the air, the spirit moves in and out of the oak and it's absorbing flavors, and the air is also getting into that cask, and that's also helping to create new flavors while the alcohol is evaporating. So while the angel share is going out, that bit that's leaving, you're getting to see how air then comes in and starts becoming a part of that whole family in that barrel. And the volume in the cask steadily falls. Maturation can't happen without that magical thing. So the angel share, as much as we miss it, it's a crucial to the part of this of happening. So the rate of respiration depends on the temperature outside. So for example, in Scotland, their casks only lose 2% of their volume each year. In the Caribbean, hot, humid, intense, they're losing about 8% a year. That's approximately more common. But in subtropical regions, that could go even up to like 14% a year. So you're seeing how intense heat, humidity. But again, up in the mountains where we are, the air is thinner, not quite as humid. We get hot, you know, hot midday once the sun has burned through the clouds, but then you get that cover at night. So there's this beautiful back and forth. So the ambient temperature will then impact how rapidly the spirit goes into the wood. So this Zacapa, so 2,300 meters, I can't remember the conversion, but it's over a mile, I believe, so above sea level. So imagine like that intense height and that altitude and that cloud cover. And you can see here what we talked about, where Zacapa's distillery and the sugarcane fields are quite close to each other as we're getting the cane cut and distilled and fermented, bringing it up to the clouds. It's this beautiful little triangle, but that road to get up there is this very complex road that's going up into the mountains. But that is crucial and is the most important part of what makes Zacapa so unique, and how Lorena is able to use her rick houses. And I love what Lorena does, because her system is more of a modified Solera system. So for those of you who have already been to Jerez and to Sherry, you will see the way the casks are done are about, here's the one cask and everything gets new make, and then it gets dripped down into, everything, little bit gets shared, and then you have the final product at the bottom. But this is a more complex system that Lorena is using, but it's also highly technical in the way that it's organized, and that organization contributes to the final product being what it is, and being consistent and being delicious. So that's where we go. So the only way to close, so here we are. This is the beautiful Solera system that we talk about. So from the distillery, it gets put into our used bourbon barrels that are not charred. Again, this is the first process of getting it nice and taking out some of those really high volatile aromas. Let that come out. What happens is then that is done. Once that's in there for the initial period, we then move it into intermediate blends. And what you're seeing over on the right is the older lots. And this is kind of what the Solera system does. It's that Lorena keeps these different aged rums, and it's all about the characters. A rum that has all young notes or all old notes will be one-dimensional. This is about making sure every rum that is introduced is bringing something different. So at each different times in maturity, as we talked about, the rum will be in a different position and have different flavors that I've highlighted. So this is where the artistry comes in. So Lorena has taken those older lots, blended into the intermediate vat, and then we put it back into the charred whiskey barrels. So that's where this is a high-level char, char number 4, nice and dark and rich, to release those, get that vanilla and get all those flavors. Then it is again blended one more time. Older rums are blended back in. And then that's when it goes into our Oloroso sherry casks. Oloroso having beautiful fruit notes, apricot. It has a bit of an oxidative already aroma and flavor, which is going to come out and show and be delicious with the rum, and also add some of these elegant drier notes to it. And then it's blended one more time, and then it's put into the PX sherry, which is a richer, darker sherry, a little sweeter, to bring out some of those notes of like fig and prune and those deeper, rich notes. And then our final finishing is, once that blend is the way Lorena is done, it's beautiful. It is then rested, water is added, and then it is bottled, and it goes out to you.
And we have some great quotes here from some people who are in this room. So I figured I'd talk about them for a minute. But we have lovely Lorena here, who's going to be showing us an amazing dish in a minute. She's talking about how she innovatively adapted the traditional Solera system into what she calls the dynamic Solera system that Lynette was just talking about, where the rum is moved through these different casks, blended with the older lots, and reblended until all those personalities, as she says, comes together to make one beautiful spirit. And Lynette here is talking about something that bartenders have really embraced about rum, and especially an aged rum like Zacapa, is using that rum as a brown spirit in cocktails normally made with whiskey or cognac, and you taking those classics as inspirations for rum cocktails. And she's also kind of talking about the renewed bartender love for rum, and that renewed curiosity is really great because there's lots to be learned about the terroir and the process behind Zacapa. And on the next slide, we have a great quote from Lauren Moat about how to approach the flavors of Zacapa when you're creating a cocktail. She talks about classic inspirations, using classic cocktails and giving them a new complexity with Zacapa, taking flora and fauna, looking at the land, and then terroir as inspiration when playing with Zacapa cocktails. And we also have our global gastronomer here, Mark Moriarty. He talks about food pairing with Zacapa, which is kind of what our demo is going to be all about today. And he talks about how Zacapa not only pairs well with sweet things, but with toasty, bready flavors, spices, fruits, as well as fresh herbs and flowers. And speaking of food pairing, you are all in for such a treat. Lynette and Lorena are going to do a little cocktail and food pairing demo for you. So I'm going to lead it right off to Lynette here.
Hi. All right. So right now, I know the style of cocktails and things that I love playing around with. And when I created this cocktail, it was about thinking about different flavors at work. So obviously leaning into what we've learned about Zacapa, thinking about it is rum that does see sherry aging. So using sherries with Zacapa in drinks, some of my favorite cocktails that I've seen out there by all of you have some sherry with Zacapa, and I love it because that flavor is just so beautiful together. This one I'm using actually a chamomile infused Fino sherry. So I'm using a sherry that's not in Zacapa, but using it to help lighten it up. I think you know, what we also look at brown spirit cocktails and know that they can also have, you can use them in different seasons as well. And I think by using the lighter sherry here and bringing it in from autumnal or winter flavors into more summer, bright, fresh, something you might have, you know, with some food while you're in Spain, if you're traveling and dreaming of being there like I am right now. And then using some other techniques and really borrowing from punch. So I have some Meyer lemons here. I'm using a Meyer lemon oleo saccharum that I made. So just taking, I like cumin. Cumin adds a little bit of that extra culinary aroma. So you take some Meyer lemons. If you don't have them, you can also use clementines, oranges with lemons to get a similar aroma of that. So you're gonna go into here and have this cocktail that has this flavor. So I'm always just gonna, you know, take some of that oleo saccharum and I'm gonna put that in my mixing glass here. And I like to stir this cocktail because it does have, it gives it the, you know, I like the texture. I don't really want to have, I want to think of it more like a punch style cocktail rather than a cocktail that's going to have a lot of, you know, agitation. I want to blend this together. And then what I like about doing with this cocktail as well is that this cocktail also has a lower proof. So I think for food pairing, what I like to do is have cocktails when you're thinking about food and how they play together, borrowing from this aperitivo style cocktail. So you're using 3/4 ounces of your Zacapa rum, which again is nice and light and it has a beautiful body to it. And then using 3/4 ounces of the chamomile infused fino. You could also just sub manzanilla. Manzanilla has a lot of chamomile note. I specifically wanted to add that chamomile, so I have a bit more. And then, like I said, it's just like a tablespoon or a bar spoon of the oleo saccharum. And then you're gonna add ice and stir it. And then we're gonna top it at the end with some pear cider or apple cider, whichever you're finding right now. You can also top this cocktail with bubbles. I added the fruit notes from the apples and pears, just because I think about it, having this with things like maybe after dinner with like a pear tart with vanilla ice cream, having this cocktail, or having it even before dinner with something like a charcuterie plate where all those kind of fruit notes play really nicely together. And this cocktail, I'm gonna strain onto these cute little punch glasses and top it. But we can talk a little bit about Lorena's food that we are pairing this with and how this is gonna go together. So I'm gonna pass it off to Lorena to talk about her dishes.
Okay, I prepare a food pairing thinking in the same aromatic molecular in the cocktail, in the Zacapa room. Yeah, this cocktail is a fresh. It's perfect for a start. Yeah, for the start with the aperitif. I prepare the food pairing is scream. Macerate in cherry wine, yeah, for 2 hours. And puree, the puree is leek, potato, and carrot, yeah. But it's not cooking with water, yeah. It's only prepared with a little olive oil in the pan. Okay, after the vegetable is soft, is have a mash the puree, yeah. Put in a little basil, yeah. But the basil, the aroma, the basil, the carrots, the leeks is very interesting with the cocktail, yeah. It's the same aromatic family. Okay, the scream only put in the pan after the scream is caramelized. Okay, it's very easy in the plate. And the first time the puree inside the puree, under the puree is the scream is delicious for me with the pairing with the cocktail. Okay. Okay, for the dessert, for me this cocktail is very good for aperitif and the end with food pairing with the pastry, the dessert. Yeah. My English is very bad, but I try. Okay.
It's okay.
I'm moving to my kitchen. Okay, I prepare very fast the dessert. The dessert is very easy. Yeah, we are use it's prepared with pear, apple. Okay, it's pear, apple. You need butter, a little sugar, lemon juice, and a little curry. Yeah. Of course, Zacapa 23. Okay. Peel the apple and the pear. Cut and slice. What do you prefer? Yeah. And the pear. Yeah. Is put in the pan. Put the butter. Yeah. Okay. Ya vi a Vanessa que está ahí. Si digo alguna cosa no viene en inglés, ella puede escribirlo. Ya te puse trabajo, Vanessa. Entonces, es very easy. Put in the pan the apple. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, when the fruit is caramelized, yeah. Look, see. You add the sugar, see? The lemon juice, and the zacapa. Okay. Okay. For me, the apple is a fresh fruit. Yeah. The cocktail is fresh fruit too. Add inside the fruit. The lemon is the same lemon Lynette used for the cocktail. Yeah, it's a Meyer lemon produced in Guatemala. Okay. At the end, use a little curry. Okay. Okay. The smell is fantastic. Okay, look. It's very easy. Now I put in the plate. Mm. Okay, for me, is the caramelized is very important in Zacapa rum. Yeah, in Zacapa rum, the raw material is the virgin sugarcane honey. It's a concentrated juice. In this process, the concentrated juice have a caramelization. Yeah, in the note, the Zacapa all the time is present. The caramel. Yeah. This is my cocktail.
Yeah.
The orchid, or of course, I love the orchid. Okay. Put a little mint in the dessert. I have in my balcony. I have a different aromatic herbs. Okay, look, it's very easy. It's delicious. Okay?
I love that you use the curry, because I think those flavors, especially like the cumin, we're going into a few more spice notes and things that are complementary one, to spice
Yes.
better in the rum, and spice
Yes.
that you would see with food, with that use a lot of things like the cinnamon note to me in Zacapa really goes well with Indian flavors. So you're seeing
Yes.
that. I love that. What I love is that you can really take Zacapa and find different notes and different pairings, and that's how it can be used for many different cuisines. I think one of the things that when we did the whole food pairing process with the French company foodpairing.com, and when I read the notes, and when they said lychee, like one of the subtle notes in Zacapa, it made my mind think in so many different ways of how I could play with Zacapa then again with a whole different style of Asian foods. And so I think what's great, and then like when you think about the cognac style in a lot of ways that this rum has, and then how that can work with a lot of classic French cuisine. So you can play around with a lot of different ways that Zacapa can work with different foods, which I think is, it's really exciting to find when we're working on spirits programs that go in restaurants, restaurant bars. You're so much working with your kitchen, with your chef, what ingredients are coming in, and playing around with that and seasonality. So working with Zacapa has given me the opportunity to discover so many different aromas and layers and flavors, and that's how we can get inspired by either the dish that's being presented, and then finding those things that you find in the rum to pair with, or leading with that cocktail and then seeing where we come with the food. So I love that the food that you made, two completely different styles of dishes. But
yeah, it's very different. It's very different. But normally in the dessert, use vanilla, cinnamon, clove. But no, for this dessert, only use lemon juice and a little curry. Yeah.
And the rum takes care of all of those other notes.
It's very different. It's very good.
Yes, you have some barrels in your kitchen behind you.
Yes, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different barrels.
Do you have rum in them?
Yes. Every barrel have a different rum and different cocktail. I love old-fashioned, but old-fashioned prepare old-fashioned, put in a little barrels. Yeah. I have one with old-fashioned, and the other have a Negroni. I love Negroni. I prepare the Negroni. No use Campari, use Aperol. And this Negroni is with Zacapa Edición Negra. In the barrels.
Yeah, I'm coming over for dinner. That sounds like a good party. That actually gives me a great segue to a question I have for Katie. You mentioned earlier that Ron Zacapa works well in recipes that normally call for a whiskey as the base spirit. And Lorena mentioned a couple like Negroni and Old Fashioned, but are there any other examples of classic whiskey drinks that you've used Zacapa as a replacement for the whiskey?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not a whiskey cocktail, but one of my favorite like stirred cocktails to do with Zacapa is like doing a Martinez variation and like incorporating some sherry. And you can play with like, instead of using maraschino, you could use like some different liqueurs to play with the flavors of Zacapa. That's always one of my favorites, like just Zacapa, sweet vermouth, some sort of sherry, and some sort of liqueur, and like playing with those ingredients. I think that always works really well with Zacapa.
That sounds delicious. Yeah, one of my all-time favorites is a Boulevardier style cocktail with a rich Italian vermouth and using Zacapa XO because it has so much elegance and force, and it's one of the drinks that actually works well both as an aperitif to get your palate stimulated or as an after-dinner drink.
I love Manhattan too with Zacapa.
Yeah.
Yes,
for sure.
That's
Zacapa XO Negroni is one of my top favorite cocktails.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was just gonna say, obviously Lorena and I are in sync for my version of the toffee Negroni. That was, playing Mr. Potato Head and putting obviously Zacapa in, and then changing out and using Aperol, lighter, so less bitter again, and then using Oloroso sherry instead of vermouth. So that way, like, you know, obviously sticking to the main structure, but it creates just a different flavor profile, and the lighter notes from the other two modifiers gives an opportunity for it's funny. So we named it, I gave it to Kara Newman for her book, just of 3 ingredient drinks. And she's like, it tastes like toffee. And I'm like, it's funny, yeah, because you're allowing all those, you know, those 3 things came together and created a new flavor note that's not the predominant flavor profile of either one. So I think it's nice when you get to play around and decide which, you know, how to tweak drinks and use different, you know, Zacapa tends to lend, even when it goes into classics. I think changing those classics up a little bit with Zacapa because you can. So change the kinds of bitters you're using, change the, you know, the modifiers slightly when you're creating classics, because it does have so many other notes that you want to highlight.
That sounds awesome. And that reminds me of my 2 favorite cocktail variations where I substitute Zacapa. One of them is the Oaxacan Old Fashioned, which of course starts as a whiskey cocktail. And but the way that I do it is with a nice muscovado sugar and some chocolate and cherry bitters to complement Zacapa. And of course, I love aperitif, lower alcohol cocktails. And I think that Zacapa, even in a small amount, has so many layers of flavor that you can put it in something like a sherry cobbler. And just putting in half an ounce with some sherries and other fortified wines and just a little bit of fresh fruit gives you a really nice opportunity as an aperitif or food pairing cocktail. Lorena, we're wondering, since you're one of the few female master blenders in the world that's often dominated by men, have you had any struggles being one of the few ladies running the show? And how did you get to where you are in such an environment?
Yeah, now it's more easy. Yeah, now it's more easy. In the past, it's a little difficult, but normally in the distillery, all the people is men. Okay, 200 people and Lorena. Yeah. But now it's more easy. In the different distillery work woman, yeah, with Zacapa, the woman is very important. Yeah. I prefer work with woman and very specific position. For example, in the blending process is very important, and the quality control too, and innovation process is for me is more easy work with women. Normally the woman is more sensitive to the aroma and the flavor, more dedicated, yeah, and more passionate, yeah. This job is very hard. You need a passion, yeah, for the job.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I can attest to that. I think that some of the most creative, loving, and dedicated coworkers that I've had in my different jobs have been the women in the field. And you're right, there are a lot of scientific studies that have shown that more women than men are super tasters, which means that they aren't necessarily smarter at tasting, but they actually have a higher concentration of taste buds in their mouth, which means that they can pick up more nuanced aromas and flavors. And of course, that is such an important tool to the job of a master blender. So it makes a lot of sense. And I hope that in the future we see more women in charge of international distilleries and blendings and things like that. So thank you for paving the road for many women out there. Lynette, back over to you. You were talking about aging up in the clouds, the house above the clouds. We're wondering, how does altitude affect aged spirits? And are most rums also aged at higher altitude?
Not most rums. It really depends on geographically where you are. So, there's specific styles. A lot, I would probably say more in the world are aged at lower levels. You have a few distilleries, one particularly in Colorado that's at a high altitude. You have, some from South and Central America, but predominantly, like if we look at the market, Caribbean style and island style rums are more plentiful in the market. So there are a lot more that are aged at sea level. So that's just a different style. And so you're going to have, we're fortunate because of the style of rum we want to make and the land allows it. If Lorena wanted to have an aging facility at sea level, she could, and she can make that style of rum because it's there. Like Guatemala is this wonderful place where you actually could make that more rapid style rum, and it just adds to a different texture. So I think you see, because it's about like that, it's like slow cooking, at the end of the day, if you, in the altitude and the atmospheric pressure is lower, we're getting less evaporation, so we can leave it for longer. So that's the process. So it's a slower, and I kind of always say too, because of that cloud cover, if you're up in the mountains, you see it, right? It's like in air in the morning, the cloud cover, then the heat comes out, and then it's like this really crazy, because you're so high, like intense, like ultraviolet heat in the middle of the day, but it's not humid. And then you have the cloud cover again. So I always say it's like the pores open up and contract. And it's like that idea of this opening and closing, like the flowers that you see that kind of happen up there as well. So that's why it's just a longer process. So with that ability, we can go longer and then choose to expose through this conversation different flavor notes that you don't later on.
Yes, it's different flavor notes, but the process, the extract, the different aroma is very different in the high altitude and the lowland, for the heat.
And I actually use that as a sales tool when I have somebody that's a dedicated Scotch whiskey drinker or Irish whiskey drinker, or somebody that likes a more nuanced spirit that's aged slower in a cooler climate. And oftentimes they might not have enjoyed other brands of rum because they have a cooked flavor since they're aged in such a hot environment and they get so much intensity from the wood. But Zacapa is an excellent tool to turn a Scotch drinker into a rum lover.
Yeah, cognac drinkers as well. I mean, that same way of like how you have the elegance of the liquid just can be translated across different categories. I think we've seen that at bartenders, right? For many years, we've been switching people from different preferences and opening their eyes to new spirits by either pairing them in cocktails with other things we know they'll enjoy and consume. We're like, oh, sure, let's do this. And so I think it's a great way to think about how that works.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember when I first went to cognac and I had never really understood what was important about blended whiskeys, blended rums, blended eau de vie to make cognac. And you realize how much of an art form it is, and you can really paint this really elegant, nuanced picture by mastering the blend. Katie, I've got another question for you. Speaking of blends, we're wondering why you would blend rums of different ages instead of bottling just a single barrel of rum at a particular age, like you see often with whiskeys, and continue with that. If you see another brand of rum and they have an age statement like blank, blank, 12-year-old, are all of the rums 12 years old in that bottle as well?
I'll answer the last question first, actually. Rum doesn't have the same rules as Scotch, where it's like the youngest is the age statement. That has to be the youngest that goes into the blend. Rum, it's, I don't know if there's actually any rule at all, but Zacapa 23 is the oldest. So that's, and Lorena can obviously speak more to that. But in terms of blending, I always like to compare it to like painting a painting. It's if someone gives you like just one color, your painting's not going to be very nuanced or interesting. But if someone gives you a lot of colors to paint with, then the painting is going to have a lot more detail and a lot more nuance. So when Lorena has all these different barrels that she's blending, it's going to bring a lot of different flavors and character and personalities to the spirit.
And Lorena, back over to you. We were wondering about char levels. We actually had a lot of people asking about the different types of charring, how you determine, say, if you're using an Oloroso or a Pedro Jimenez or a former bourbon barrel, which of those barrels would you char, and how do you determine the intensity of the char or how much time the barrel is exposed to the flame?
The charge for Zacapa, the specification for us is a heavy recharge, yeah. But when your cask is a very hard recharge, it's more vanilla, yeah. It's more the dry fruit, yeah, the aroma. The cask, you the time, yeah. The cask is fresh, is a humidity inside the cask. You need more time. The cask is a little drier. You need less time. Okay. The more important point for us is la cantidad del quemado, is the intensity, the recharge in the wood, yeah. Mm-hmm. For the cherry oloroso and PX cask, we are using, but in the past, yeah, the owner of the company have 3 different family. Is from Spain. This family, when they not have American oak, buy in Spain at the cherry wine and the PX wine, yeah. When I check the different rum and the different casks, I decide what is the Solera system. Okay, for me, is very important. The first time, the ex-American whiskey cask, we are use both bourbon and Tennessee whiskey, yeah? I prefer for American cask. Okay, for me, the American cask normally is more intensity in the wood, in the component, the wood and the vanilla, yeah. For me, it's more hard. Yes, the perfect match, the rum, the fresh rum with ex-American whiskey cask, yeah. And the second time, we are use the recharge ex-American whiskey, the first time the Zacapa in the aging process. In this second step is very important for 3 different aspects. The first is the intensity and the vanilla and the woody, okay? When you recharge the gas, the carbon, the charcoal inside the barrels is very important, but this charcoal is very good for the smooth the rum, yeah, okay. At the end, use the oloroso, but the oloroso is more delicate, the aroma to the Pedro Jimenez wine, okay. But use as a different system, but only for aroma and the flavor.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And I have one last question I'd like to ask everybody, since we love pairing Ron Zacapa with food. I was wondering if Lynette, then Katie, Lorena, and myself can share our favorite Zacapa and food pairing that they've experienced.
Right now, especially the time, barbecue.
Barbecue with Zacapa Edición Negra is
Perfect.
Fantastic. Yes. Delicious.
Lorena, do you ever blend Addition Negra with Ron Zacapa
Yes.
Solera 23? You do?
Yeah. So, Adición Negra? Yeah.
And Katie, what about you? Have you got a favorite Zacapa and food pairing?
This isn't one I've experienced, but I had this dish and I thought to myself, this would be so good with Zacapa. It was a like sweet vanilla bean souffle, and it was served as like a cheese course in a fine dining restaurant. It was a sweet vanilla souffle, and they put a slit in it and poured like a smooth gorgonzola cream sauce into it. And I was like, Zacapa would be with this.
That sounds amazing. You always impress me with your dining experiences. I love following them along. And
I love food.
Me too. So we're very lucky to be in the business that we're in. And of course, I have had one of my favorite world-class experiences doing Life is Like a Box of Chocolates. I was highlighting Forrest Gump. My last serve was I had some custom-made chocolate truffles that were filled with Zacapa XO, caramel, and cayenne pepper. And I served it with some Zacapa and a side serve of a pineapple shrub and soda. And it was super fun and tasty way to highlight some of the flavors.
Wow.